And don't be fooled by these fears that the PAP has put into our hearts for 52 years. That without the PAP things would be bad. My friends, things are bad. The PAP pretends that everything is good. The PAP pretends that the $800 you will receive next week will pay for the entire GST that you will incur next year. I met Chee Soon Juan in 2000. I had come back to Singapore to do my field work for my PhD. And Chee Soon Juan and J.B. Jayaratnam had just set up the Open Singapore Centre, which was a public policy research centre. So I went to see Chee Soon Juan to sort of say hello and see if I could work with him. And there was a particular project he was involved in at the time. It was called Elections Free and Fair, ? The conduct of elections in Singapore. And we designed the cover. It had two hands handcuffed together, dropping a ballot paper into the ballot box. That was my idea. But at the time, I was afraid of being associated publicly with Chee Soon Juan. So the byline was a report produced by the Open Singapore Centre. So my name is not on that report. I regret it now, but this was, 24 years ago. So we worked on that, but then I went back to Sheffield to complete my research, and it was only in 2009 when I came back to Singapore that I made contact with him and his wife, Dr. Huang Chi-mei, his sister, and that's when I started becoming involved in the STP quite actively.
Dr. Vincent Wijeysingha.
We work very closely together, but Soon Juan is a very private person. And so it's difficult to get a sense of who he is as a person. Mostly, I think, I can't speak for other colleagues, but for me, it's through observing him, through working with him, that you get a sense of his values, his tenacity, his courage, also the deep compassion that motivates him. Also from engaging with his family. So his sister is a very gregarious, outgoing person. His wife, May, is also very outgoing, friendly, and I've watched the children grow up. When I first met him in 2000, his eldest daughter had just been born, so I've seen them grow and interacted with them. Interacted with his late mother, who was a very revered figure, a lady of great dignity and grace. We all took a lot of inspiration from her. Always at the election rallies, sitting behind us, very calm, a typical Chinese lady of the old school, very gracious. He is never say die type, right? Which is why he has been able to stick with it since 1993. This is 30 years, right? Despite how he's been treated, what he's been called, and the various legal actions against him. That's quite unusual. I don't think it's normal. He's outside of the typical range of human functioning. I don't mean he's weird or anything like that, no. But he is someone who has a greater degree of strength and tenacity and courage than is within the normal range. Where it comes from, I don't know. I've often thought that perhaps it comes from him being a psychologist, so understands human nature and is able to explain his opponents in that sense. Or I thought it could come from his stoic Chinese culture where you don't emote very much. That's possible as well. Maybe his Christian values. Although I do know that the church that they used to attend years ago made them feel very uncomfortable. Them meaning the whole family, he, May, and the children. So uncomfortable that they had to leave. It's not unusual for organizations and groups in Singapore to make non-PAP or people who are opponents of the PAP feel incredibly uncomfortable. And if one assumes that you might find less of that in the Christian church, it's a wrong assumption. You'll find more of it. I've had it myself in a variety of encounters. There's a line in Henry IV, I think, what's bred in the bone will out in the flesh. In other words, if this has become part of who you are, and if you cradle Christian, it will be part of who you are, this sort of values, then that could be another of his motivating characteristics. I've sometimes also speculated as to whether he's on the autism spectrum, because, as I said, that he's outside of the typical range of human tenacity, right? Which to me, my go-to must be autistic, but I can't make that judgment call now. I remember I once said that Singapore was the way it was because we have been governed for 31 years by an autistic Cambridge-trained lawyer. And the television studio said we had to cut that part out. If not, Lee might sue me because I wasn't qualified to make a clinical diagnosis like that. If I'm not wrong, it was Cooling Off Day, the play by Alfian Sa'ad. And it was an interesting thing where he interviewed people like myself and various others, just a normal conversation, and then he turned that into a play script.
If the opposition party win, you take care of yourself. Government won't take care of you. Wow. Threaten leh. Nghe了杜兰啊 ITL no, I 杜兰 no. This kind of thing is same tactic one. You see, they are still using the same old tactic. Upgrading lah, give you ang pao lah, $900, $700, $500. 有花不？无花嘛。$500, honestly speaking, I go Zouk one time, bo liao.
I was going to say, Jo Kukutas played me in that play. She's a woman. And I said that I'd never seen someone play Vincent Wijeysingha with such a manly, or more manly than me. She's not manly. She's a wonderfully feminine woman, but it was a joke I was making about her. Perhaps don't put that in your head.
As far as I know, he hasn't held a steady job for many years.
I think it was Grace Fu who once said that Soon Juan had never held down a regular job. The implication being that he was a failure or wastrel of some kind because he had never held down a job. I thought that was particularly hypocritical given it was her party leadership that ensured that he was out of a job for all the time that he's been active in politics. So it's a silly statement to make from people on the PAP side. But I suppose we have to ask ourselves what we mean by success when we talk about who's a success and who's a failure. People like Nelson Mandela in jail for 27 years, Chia Tai-po in jail for 32 years, Aung San Suu Kyi in jail for 20 years and now back in jail. But no one would say that these people were failures. Because if one's definition of success is holding down a job, earning money, and all the 5 C's that we often talk about in Singapore, then all of those people would fail that test. But if by success we mean people who have contributed, I'm remembering a quote from Salman Rushdie's autobiography, where he said that literature helps us to expand what it's possible for humanity to be. And I think the same can be said of people like Chee Soon Juan. He has given us a sort of measure of what it's possible for a Singaporean to be. Also in terms of shaping the SDP, a group of people who have remained committed to its ideals and able to attract good candidates to participate in elections, to stand for elections, then by those measures, and in the face of some of the most vitriolic opposition that anyone has had to deal with in Singapore in the last 60, 70 years, then I would have thought, and this is certainly my view, that Soon Juan is a success on many levels and a great inspiration. You see, in my view, the PAP has never wasted resources on political control. You use as little resources as possible to achieve the goal you want. So I don't think they've ever bothered to destroy those who are not a threat. So we can probably calibrate the extent of the threat by the amount of opposition towards individuals like Soon Juan.
The PAP continues to attack my character. They've called me all sorts of names: cheat, liar, gangster, traitor, psychopath. They've sacked me, jailed me, sued me, and made me a bankrupt. But I'm still standing.
Francis Xiao wrote a book called To Catch a Tartar, and the foreword or preface was by Devan Nair a few years after he had resigned the presidency. And he described Lee as a caged fury, pacing up and down the dining room after the Ensign by-election, talking about how he was going to crush Jayaratnam, make him crawl to him on bended knees. Devan Nair had said this was all out of proportion to the threat that he posed. Partly, I think that was Lee's personality. Couldn't stand any resistance to him. But partly, it's also the PAP's style. You know, you don't allow for any weakness in the narrative because weaknesses can grow, right? And so, on that measure, Soon Juan is a significant threat. If you look at Lee in the 50s and Soon Juan, very similar, you know? English educated, highly intellectual, a bit socially inept, articulate, very policy oriented, very strong, courageous personalities, able to mold a party, simple in their personal habits. Somewhere down the line, something happened to Lee Kuan Yew. You know what Lord Acton said, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Perhaps that happened to Lee Kuan Yew. Not in a financial sense, but in a sense of his own self-aggrandizement, right? Chee isn't like that. But I don't think that's to say that Chee would never be like that. I have often joked with other people in the party, but I don't think to him, that if he became Prime Minister, we would need a Chee Soon Juan to challenge him. And Soon Juan may well have become a Lee if he had a similar historical trajectory. Those who might not have considered Soon Juan too elevated to be open and frank with him were reasonably few. That has grown in time. Paul Tambaya, a man of, very significant intellect, has been one of those. Perhaps to some extent me as well. I mean, you can measure it by the fact that very, very, very few people in the party call him Soon Juan. Everybody calls him Dr. Chee or Chee or CSJ. And I think that's an indicator of the force of his personality and intellect that people have felt slightly insecure about. So what I mean is that's meant that he was always very alone in terms of his needing to think through things and formulate opinions on his own resources. I have seen similarities. I mean, the way I described Lee a while ago and the way I described Soon Juan a while ago seem to coincide. And the SDP the SDP now and the PAP in the 50s and 60s were identical. Social democratic parties oriented to a liberal democratic economy, but with sufficient redistribution to ensure that people were brought up together with the economy.
In relation to the SDP, I want to say the first thing that we need to do, and the first thing that we have proposed in our shadow budget, which unfortunately the media hasn't covered very well, I encourage you to look on our website for it, is to turn our public services into non-profit services. So do not make money from the housing of people, do not make money from the feeding of people, do not make money from the educating and the keeping people healthy. And also, the cost of government, which has to be reduced significantly. $3-4 million a year is obscene by anybody's measure when you have people who are earning $4 an hour.
He has made mistakes in the running of the party, decisions on elections, but there are people around him who he will listen to. He's not the sort of person who doesn't listen. So he's a Democrat, not just by political conviction, but also by personal belief. I have never seen him override a group decision. I have never seen him not listen to the group, whether it's the Central Committee or the party as a whole or some of his closer collaborators. I've also never known him to not take people's views into account before doing something. He may then not do exactly what people had said, but his belief in democracy is instinctive. Leadership has to be visionary, right? If not, it's nothing. No? So the party at present is a party of bureaucrats. And bureaucrats are good at executing policy. They are not good at either shaping policy or asking critical questions that challenge policy. Which is why they find the SDP so threatening, because they are not schooled in critical debate. I once bumped into Grace Fu in a petrol station. We were both in the queue. But as luck would have it for her, we were both stuck behind the people in front who were... So we had to make small talk. She looked absolutely terrified. And I don't think she was terrified of me. I think she was simply terrified that she had never been in a situation where she had to deal with someone as social equals. I'm not saying I was a government equal, but as social equals. Terrified. Couldn't string two sentences together. So I helped out and I made small talk. And I don't think that's unusual in this party. You are in a closeted space, right? You're not going to learn how to engage with people, everyday social engagement, and it produces a very closed worldview. There are three routes into the party: trade unions, military, and civil service. That's it. And these are not places where think about that first cabinet in 1959, right? Lawyers, journalists, economists, scientists, grassroots activists like Ahmad Ibrahim. So they were very different to the bureaucratic culture of the PAP today.